Right, this video is about systematic note-taking. And if you don't know what systematic note-taking is, it's a way of making notes about literature that you read as part of your research in a way that steps through the text systematically. That is, there's a process, there's a way of doing it. There are particular things that we want to find out about each text and make note of and keep a record of and have a think about. And systematic note-taking is a way of thinking about that and trying to organize the way you do your work as you read. And as researchers, we're going to do a lot of reading. So let's have a look. I've got a little presentation here for you. So what I want us to start thinking about when we are looking at note-taking and systematic notes, I should actually get back here to the start of my presentation here. When we're starting to think about systematic notes and making notes systematically about literature, one of the things that we need to start with is remembering that we have this kind of main challenge as researchers. And that is we have heaps of literature, whatever field we're in it, no matter how kind of sparse it might seem to you at the moment, there is a lot of literature that you need to be across in order to be able to do something like produce a piece of research, produce some new and valuable understanding of the world, or kind of formulation of an understanding of the world that already exists. So you need to be able to read a lot of material, parse that material, figure out what's going on, and figure out how you can make a contribution to that. That's what research is a contribution to the body of knowledge, contribution to the discourse about a particular topic. And that's a big challenge because there's lots of reading to do. We have lots of journal articles, lots of books, and we need a way to manage all of that. And part of the way that we manage that, of course, is by managing the resources themselves. We need to be able to find, store, retrieve, and cite those resources when we're writing our documents. But also just for ourselves, we need to be able to find them and retrieve them when we want to read them. But then also we need to be able to make notes that we can find, store, retrieve, and refer to, I guess we might say. That is, we want to kind of be able to think with our notes. We want to be able to use our notes to help us generate ideas that will contribute to the research that we want to put out into the world. So when we're thinking about systematic note-taking, we want to kind of recognize that challenge. We have this huge amount of literature that we need to do, that we need to be across, and we need to be able to read it and write about it effectively and reliably and sustainably as researchers. And one of my big messages here is that research is writing, thinking is writing, writing is thinking. That is all that we are doing, everything that we're doing in research bends towards, is in the service of producing text, producing writing, writing for readers to read, to help them think about the problem that we've been thinking about. And hopefully in our writing, we want to convince them that they should think about the world like we have learned to think about the world in our research. Everything that we do in research is about writing. And of course, my contention to you that I've talked about in previous videos and in class is that that means we should do writing at every stage of research. We shouldn't save writing until the end. We should do writing at every point in our research journey. And this is kind of what I talked about previously as the big myth, that we do save. We tell ourselves that we save writing till the end, that we do our kind of reading about the field that we're in, and then we go and do some of the actual kind of research, like the actual kind of field work or the lab work or looking at primary sources or whatever. And then we do the writing. And then we have this kind of magical kind of collect profit mechanism going at the end. And side note, there's no profit in academia, at least not in the kind of university world. But the profit we collect is like credibility, I suppose, scientific capital, to use a Bourdieusian term. So yeah, this is the big myth, the big problem, the big lie we tell ourselves, that writing comes at the end, just before the collection of profit. That's not a sustainable way of doing things. In fact, as I've said to you previously, I think it's dangerous. It leads to a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. It also undermines one of the big kind of components in research, which is the human brain, that we need to do thinking. We need, for research to take place, it's still the case that humans need to do a lot of kind of cogitation, a lot of mental work. For that to take place. And a lot of that work, that mental work, that thinking work, occurs in the form of writing. That is, by writing, you kind of you generate ideas when you write, and particularly when you read literature and write about that literature, you generate a lot of ideas as you engage more and more with your research topic, your research question in particular. As you'll read literature, you begin to see connections that you haven't seen before, haven't seen anyone else talk about. You'll begin to see problems that you haven't seen anyone talk about. And those are the things that you want to hone in on. Those are the things where you and your research can add value to the discourse of your field. So thinking is writing. It's the most productive thing we can do as researchers is write. Write at every stage of our work as researchers. Write at the reading stage. Write during the actual work of research. If it's out in the field work books. If it's in the lab, it's lab books. If it's in the library, it's notebooks. Whatever it is, we should be doing writing. Always be writing. Write at every stage of your research project. And what I contend to you, colleagues, is that this does a couple of things for us. It gives us some kind of sense of productivity. That is, that we can see we've done work because we have writing to help prove it to ourselves. And that can be quite beneficial at an experiential level, that is, it's reassuring, but it's also really useful for us at a second level, and that's that it produces a lot of text. We have to do, as I said, we have to do writing, we have to produce writing that is for other people to read and benefit from our research. And if we do a lot of writing along the way, we have all of this kind of material to begin to polish into stuff that other people can read. Articles, theses, books, chapters, whatever. Now, why make notes? Well, along the way, apart from producing that text, it also helps us to simply to remember things. As I've said before, note-taking is a great way to help you remember the things that you need to remember about your topic area, about your research area, about the things that are peripheral to your research. Sometimes you need to do a lot of peripheral research around your topic to kind of figure out where the edges of what you're interested in are. But you need to remember that. But we also use writing, as I said earlier, to generate ideas. That is when we kind of have an idea, it often kind of like sounds really good to us in our head. And then when we write it out and we see it on the page or the screen, we look at it and we think, oh, that's crap. That's just not a great idea at all. And so when there's this interesting kind of loop going on, that when we put ideas out onto the page, we begin to see them, like kind of quote unquote see them, see our thinking, and that kind of act of seeing your own thinking begins to change the way you think. You can begin to refine and kind of rework your thinking, as it were. It's terrific as a tool of thought. Writing is a terrific tool of thought. It helps us do thinking more effectively, I would say, and more reliably. But we also have this issue of needing a note-taking system, and particularly a system for taking notes when we're reading literature. And as I said at the beginning, we have heaps of literature to read. And having, as I've said, through all of this, through this unit, RD1, a way of doing, a way of constraining the work that you're trying to do, and a kind of system, a process of doing something, helps to reduce what I call friction. Friction is the kind of resistance that you might feel to doing some kind of work. Here it's making notes on literature, on text, on journal articles or books or whatever. And some of that friction comes from simply not knowing what to do, not knowing what to write about, not knowing how to structure your notes, not knowing how to think about what you'll do with your notes afterwards. Build yourself a way of doing that is a systematic way of taking notes about literature, and that kind of friction will be much reduced, I contend. And what the hell? I guarantee it. I guarantee that the friction that you will feel will be reduced. There it is. It's a money-back guarantee for you. All right, so we want to do this, and when we're doing it, I have a couple of tips for you. The first one is to treat reading let's say a journal article, treat reading a journal article like a project. A project has multiple tasks within it. And so that project of reading that journal article, you can break it down into manageable tasks that you might only be able to dedicate, say, little chunks of 1 hour or whatever to. Think about reading an article like that. How can I break this down? I'll talk about that in a little bit about some of the tips for that. That also gives you some productive outputs if you break it down into tasks, rather than you know, having to, so let's say, read a whole book, and that's just your task for the day is read the book. If you break it down into more manageable tasks, like read chapter 1, for example, and make notes on it, then what you have are some more kind of actionable outputs that you will have something productive to show for it. The productive element being the notes that you make. But also specifically to the work of research, when we're reading and making notes, we want to be taking notes on certain things. And those things in particular are, well, in the main, the claims and the arguments that authors forward to us. That is, when we read, when we read the work of others, what we're looking at is the work that other people have produced because of their research, in which they try and convince us to think about the world like they are thinking about the world. They're forwarding an argument to us that's trying to force us to think about the world in a certain way. And we, as the readers, particularly in the domain of research, our job is to think about those claims and arguments and assess them for their merit, their validity, their worth, in the context of our own research. As in, do these claims and arguments help us do our own thinking and our own work, research work about the world? But then within that, in terms of understanding claims and arguments, we need to understand the methods and the questions that were asked in order to be able to understand how those claims and arguments were made. So we want to take notes on methods and questions and data as well. And we also want to take notes on what the authors think the implications of their argument are. That's often what you'll find in the conclusion or the discussion section of an article. And then, of course, we also want to keep note of our own thinking about this piece, this text, our own evaluation of it overall, how it might sit within the discourse of our field, and whether it's a useful piece for us or not, and why. That's really important too. So what I want to do now is look at a little document that I've produced for you. I'm actually going to put it on my website as well so that it's permanently accessible. It's something that Dr. Jack Sonis and I wrote a few years ago. This is kind of version 3 or 4 of it, I suppose. It's evolved over the years a little bit and grown as things do. And it's what I refer to as, what we refer to as the schema. We couldn't come up with a better acronym than that. So, I mean, side note, if you can think of a better acronym for this, then please let us know. But yeah, this is the schema document. And what we're interested in here is systematic note-taking. And this document outlines our thinking about systematic note-taking and why it's a thing that we do as researchers, but also why it's a good thing to do for researchers, and how we can do this in a way that is sustainable and reliable, that breaks it down into manageable units of kind of work, and gives us some outputs that are really useful for us and valuable for us, I would say, in terms of being able to create writing that is effective writing that is useful or valuable to readers. So I'm not going to read it here. I've added to this recently, but I'll make this available for you. But essentially, I go over at the start about why we want to make notes and why we want to think about making notes on literature. Footnote, side note, end note. It's because we need to do a lot of writing, and because a lot of the writing that we need to do needs to be about the writing that has come before us. That is, in research, one of the ways we do things is we say, look at all of this research that's gone on previously. And now, because all of that research has gone on previously, I'm going to do this particular piece of research because there's some kind of problem in the way that research was done before that hasn't addressed the thing that I'm interested in. And what I'm going to tell you as readers is that this problem is a problem for you as well because you haven't looked at it previously. That's a gross oversimplification, but that's effectively what's going on in research. Work has gone on in the past. There's a problem with it. I'm going to fix the problem for you. So to be able to do that work of saying to your readers, work has gone on in the past, you need to read all of that work and summarize it for them in what's known as the introduction or the background section of your article, chapter, book, thesis, whatever it is. Also got a hyperlink here to a terrific article, or to a book actually, called You Are Not a Gadget. Definitely worth reading. But this is the kind of 3-point summary of this system of note-taking. Step 1, read and make notes as you read. Step 2, go over those notes and distill them into a short, highly structured overview of the article. And then 3, create what's called a discursive, that is a kind of a piece of prose, a discursive version of that overview that describes, summarizes, and evaluates the article. And I suggest that for that third item, you make that short. I like to do something like kind of 200 words or 150 even, because that's a terrific constraint to work with. And I think constraints are really good and useful for us in terms of writing, particularly when we're trying to write effectively and usefully for us. But like note, all 3 of those steps, read, distill, create, all 3 of them involves the act of both reading and writing. That is, at every stage in your systematic note-taking process, you are reading and writing about the text that you're trying to summarize. So we go down, we look in more detail. What do we got here? A 10-step. This is the Sonus Norman 10-step program for taking notes systematically on literature. Again, I'll leave you to go over it yourselves. But the idea is that you can step through each of these 10 and get yourself into the habit of systematically, that is in a stepwise way, taking notes on each of these 10 points. For example, you want to kind of go through the habit of writing out all of the bibliographic details for yourself. You want to go through the habit of picking up in the abstract, but particularly the introduction, what the main claims about the problem being dealt with in the article or the book or whatever are. You want to do things like make careful note of the methods that are used to do the work, to do the research, as told in the article, and make notes about whether those methods line up with the conclusions that are made at the end of the article, and whether they line up with the problem that's pitched in the introduction. And that doesn't always happen so well. Or if it doesn't happen so well, maybe it's not that it doesn't happen so well, it's just that you can see problems with it. They might not be fatal flaws, but they might be problems that you can help deal with in your own research. You want to make notes about this. We want to make sure that while you're reading, this is really important, while you're reading, you have a mechanism with which to record your own thinking, rather than the description of the article that you're trying to do as you summarize, as you write. So what's going on here is you're reading, and you might kind of read, let's say the introduction is 6 paragraphs long, you might read all the way through the introduction, and then you might do like a little 1-paragraph summary of those 6 paragraphs. Or alternatively, you might do something like a 1-sentence summary of each paragraph as you read along. But then you also want a way to be able to capture your own thinking. That is where you kind of have an idea and you think, you know what they're talking about here is really interesting, but the authors are missing this particular kind of little body of research that's gone on in this related field. And I think it'd be really important to combine those. Make a note of that, colleagues. Make a note of that. But you need a way to make sure that you understand that that's your note and not a description of the article. And so, for example, when I take notes, I take notes in a notebook, in an actual with pen and paper. And as I'm going through a book or an article or whatever, as I'm reading, I'll take notes on page numbers. Let's see if I can show you an example. So you can see just there's a page number. But if I'm recording a note of my own thinking, then I have a little asterisk. Jack, when he takes notes, he has a little way of kind of formatting the text. If he's taking digital notes, he often takes digital notes, where he formats the text so he can understand that's me thinking here. That's not a description of the text itself. Because what you're trying to do is capture your piffs. Like you're trying to kind of capture those moments where you think, I've got something interesting to add to this, or wouldn't it be interesting if we pursued this idea, or how does this relate to that other article that I read the other day? Like all of that kind of connective, tangential, creative kind of thinking that happens as you read a a text, you want to be able to capture that, because that's really valuable for you later on down the track. When you're trying to do something like put together an introduction section in an article or a background section, or you're trying to put together an argument in a thesis, where you say, all of this work has gone on in the past, but here's a bunch of problems with it that I'm going to help correct for you. This is also what's known as free writing, and I've got a little link there to an article by Peter Elbow about free writing and about how and why free writing can be a good thing for you. What you're trying to do is just kind of capture ideas. There's this old kind of notion that brains are for having ideas and not remembering them or not keeping them, which is great, but we actually still do need to keep and remember ideas, and externalizing your thinking, capturing them on the page, is a great way of being able to remember all of those terrific ideas that you have, colleagues. Then I've got here in step 8 a bunch of specific questions. What are the methods or claims? What claims do the authors say they've made? What claims do the authors actually make? Sometimes those are different, colleagues. How or in what way are the claims made? That is, are they made from data, or are they speculation from data, or something else maybe? How is it that the authors claim to know about the claims that they're making? That's what's known as epistemology, the account of knowledge. How well do the claims align with the methods, as I said earlier, and so on. The idea is that we go through this, we read through an article, we kind of make notes, summarizing as we go, we capture our own thinking. What we're trying to do is summarize what's going on in the article so that we have a little distilled map of the article, our own little distilled map that kind of reads chronologically, but we can break it down instead if it's more useful for us in terms of the sections. So that is, you might kind of take notes on the introduction and the conclusion section as a pair, and then you might move next back into the middle of the article and look at the methods, for example, section. So it depends on how you want to read an article, what's useful for you, and how you break the article up in terms of being a project full of tasks that you want to do. I'll talk about that in a little bit though. Then we get to step 2. So all of that, colleagues, was just step 1. Like all 10 of those steps was just step 1. Now we've gotten to the end. We've finished reading the article. We've finished reading the book. Now we've gotten to the end, and now we need to go over our own notes. As I've said, hopefully multiple times before, we want to use our notes not to just collect what happened to us, but we want to use our notes to think with. We want to use our notes as a repository of knowledge. We want to use our notes as a second brain. Our notes help us do our thinking. And so here we've taken notes on an article, including capturing our own thinking, our own reactions to the claims and arguments and methods and data put forward in that article. Now, the way we've connected it to other literature, perhaps, or to questions that we might have. Now we want to go over all of that, and we want to distill it into what Jack and I call a schema overview. This is the acronym that we couldn't think of a better kind of acronym for. So yeah, let us know if you can think of something better. Something with a bit more kind of pep, ziz, whatever. But the idea is that what we want is a highly structured overview in which you might write, say, a short paragraph. Maybe that paragraph is only a sentence. Maybe it's kind of, 100 words or something. Who knows? On each of these, the summary of the article, a little paragraph about the claims that are made in the article, a little paragraph about the methods and data, referring to specific pages or in your own notes, or specific pages in the document itself, as needed. Mentioning theories that are used. Sometimes the theory that's used changes the way data, or in fact always changes the way data is interpreted. You want to make a little paragraph discussing the argumentation in the article, whether the argument, the implications of the research are justified by what's going on, whether it works or not. And then you want to include your own reflection, a little paragraph on your own reflection about the article. What might arise because of it? Like, because you've read this article, what are you forced to do? What's it causing you to do? It might be causing you to go and read a bunch of other stuff. It might be causing you to see problems that you hadn't thought of before. Like make a note of this stuff in reflection, like having finished the article and thought about it as a whole. And so now you've got this highly structured kind of 5-ish paragraph note. Then we move on to step 3. And step 3 is where what you want to do is another level of distillation. So the schema overview is like a distillation of all of your reading notes and your thinking notes about the text. And now step 3 is an annotation. And some of you will have heard of an annotated bibliography, or you will have read an annotated bibliography. It's like a reference list with like a little summary description and evaluation of the piece for each piece in the reference list. And what you're trying to do is create an annotation for yourself. That is and in particular, a discursive annotation. That is one that describes, summarizes, evaluates in a single string of text, like a piece of prose, the article. So essentially what you're doing is kind of reverse engineering or kind of writing your own abstract, writing your own version of an abstract for the piece. This is really useful for you because that's what you can refer to in the future. If you're thinking, oh, what did authors A and B say about that thing? And you go and have a look at your annotation and you remind yourself, that's what they said. They were looking at this. This was the problem. This is what they dealt with. This is what they said, and this is what I think of it. All in kind of four to kind of 8 short sentences, 200 words most. Like, that gives you a really tight, concise, punchy summary and evaluation of the work. And that is really, really useful for you, both in terms of thinking. That is when you're trying to understand, what did I think about that argument? What was that paper about? But also then when you're trying to produce documents of your own later on. And that's where I've included, this is the latest material I've added to this document, is this page. The bonus, the big bonus, the huge value add and bonus of systematic note-taking is that hopefully what it gives you is this huge, as you read more and more and more, this huge library of notes with which you can think about your research problem, your topic, your area, your understanding of your field, what's gone on in your field, the history of your field, the work that's come before you, but also this library of your own kind of twice distilled notes about literature from which you can borrow when you are writing your own pieces for other readers, when you're trying to convince your people about your work, when you're writing an article or a thesis or a book. And here on this page, what is it, page 6, page 5? Page 5. I've got a description of how that works. And the quick version of it is that you should paraphrase your own notes. That is, you've got your annotations, your discursive annotations of each journal article, each book that you read. And what you can do when it comes time, say, to write the introduction section of an article or your thesis or whatever, is you can kind of use those as storyboards and kind of pin them up and say, okay, well, authors A and B talked about this, but authors kind of C and D talked about this other issue, and they're both kind of overlapping, but I can see some problems in the middle. And you can use your discursive notes to kind of storyboard the way you describe the work that's come before you. But then when it actually comes to writing your work, all you have to do, colleagues, you've already done the writing, all you have to do is paraphrase yourself. Just paraphrase your own notes as is appropriate for the story that you're telling about the work that's come before. And there you have all your writing already done. All you had to do was paraphrase yourself. There's none of this kind of sit down with a blank page in front of you and have to think about how am I going to fill this blank page with all of my understanding of my field of research over the last 50 years or whatever. No, you've done all of that already. You've storyboarded it out, and all you're having to do is paraphrase that storyboard as is meaningful, and reference it, of course, and typeset it and all the rest. But that's all of that's also fun. But then remember, you've got your distillations, but then you've also got your schema overview. So if there's one particular article that you need to kind of dive into a little bit more deeply, you can go the next level down. You can recurse down into your schema, and you can flesh it out a bit, what the methods were, for example, or what you thought a problem was with the research and the way it connected to some other stuff. And then if you needed to go down a level even deeper and kind of pinpoint, the way, maybe the way the researchers collected data, for example, you can go into your own notes where you have the description of how the authors collected data, and your own thoughts on that, and flesh that out into the thing that you're creating. But you also have the page number there where you were doing the reading, and so you can go direct to the article itself, should you need to. So this kind of 3-level way of doing notes is really, really handy because A, it gives you text that you can paraphrase from, B, it gives you a map for how to go down deeper and deeper in terms of more and more detail should you need it, including lots and lots of detail. But then C is hugely, hugely, hugely important. It gives you your own thinking as well. If you've kept notes systematically, including encouraging yourself to think onto the page as you read and making kind of careful notes to distinguish between your own thinking and the description of the article, what you'll have are those little bonus thought bubbles peppered through your notes. And as you go over your notes afterwards, as you're making your schema overview, as you're making your discursive annotations, you begin to kind of develop those ideas, those thought bubbles, and see if they're worth anything or not. Some of them are just bubbles and they'll pop. Others of them will be more useful for you and interesting and valuable. And those can become the creative kind of connective work that you do as a researcher that adds value to your colleagues, the work of your colleagues, and makes your writing really valuable for them as you begin to connect things that they haven't been able to connect in, or in ways that they haven't been able to connect. And I've got a link to Andy Matuschak's note about evergreen note writing in the document just there. Oh, you can't see that. I'll just scroll down a bit. That bonus section is where I'm talking about the importance of making sure you keep track of your own thinking and reactions to articles. And so that's, that's kind of systematic note-taking. Go through an article in a stepwise manner, trying to collect, summarize and summarize the article, summarize what's happening in the article, and collect your own thinking and reaction and thoughts and connective kind of thinking as it happens. Then go back after you finish, go back, go over your notes, summarize your notes, distill them into this schema format: summary, claims, methods and data, argumentation, and your overall reflection. And then go back again and summarize that work into a 200, and if it were me, I'd be doing 150 word annotation, because 150 words is kind of, you could do 6 sentences maybe in 150 words, and that's tight. That's really tight. You've got a sentence for kind of each major thing in the article: summary, claims, methods and data, argumentation, reflection. And the idea is to turn it into prose. That is a paragraph that's fully formed, stands on its own, you could read as a single unit. So you can use reader expectation theories to set up the problem in the first sentence and then resolve it in the final sentence, and so on. That's the summary of my contention of what I think systematic note-taking is and can do for you, colleagues. And I guess I'm just going to finish by talking about, I guess, kind of meditating for a second a little bit about the value add of having notes, and particularly with this system of going over things at least twice, but hopefully what you'll do is go over your notes more frequently, because what that does is give you a way of doing what I guess you could call a version of spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is the idea that when you want to learn something, you try and encounter it over time and test yourself in the knowledge in some kind of way frequently, but so that the spaces between the times you encounter the thing you want to remember get further and further apart. There's software you can use to help you do that, but I think a good way of kind of naturally doing it is to go through your notes, your literature notes, and your own permanent notes if you keep permanent, or evergreen notes. But you're trying to review your notes so that you embed the knowledge, you embed your understanding of the research that's going on in your field, you embed your understanding and knowledge of particular research articles, and you're particularly important, you embed your own understanding of where your work fits within the discourse of your field. And you also want to kind of go over and review your notes like frequently or habitually, I guess is a better way of saying it. In a regular kind of way, in a systematic way. That is, you review your own notes in a systematic or regular or ritual or habitual kind of way, because you can make notes from your notes. You know, you continue your thinking. We don't ever want to kind of end our thinking. We want our thinking to continue. That's part of our work as researchers. And if we're doing thinking, we must be writing, because if we're not writing, then we're not doing any thinking, remember, colleagues. If there's no writing, then it didn't happen, the thinking didn't happen. So we need to make sure we make notes. And why not make notes? Because it'll give us more information, more text from which we can borrow when we're putting together that journal article or that thesis. And particularly as we're doing that review work, then we can, as our knowledge increases about the field, you know, you might do your first version of systematic note-taking with your first article, and you'll think, terrific, I've got notes on one article, yay. But that experience, when you get to the end of it, will be very different when it's your 50th article on your field of research. Because what you'll have in your mind and what you'll have on your computer or in your notebooks or in your notebooks will be a map of the work that's come before you, complete with detailed summaries and the way the articles connect to each other and the way they connect with your own research. And that's really important and really valuable. So I'll make this document available on my website. I'll also make it available on Views for you. I wish you luck with your work going forward. Thanks, colleagues.